Well, friends, welcome back to Avid Readers. And I have a new friend. We've never met in person. I have enjoyed her book, so I'm super excited to have Connilyn Cossette here today. First of all, Connilyn, why don't you just start by introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about you and your books?
Thank you so much, Trisha. I'm super excited to be here chatting with you today. I am what they call a biblical fiction writer. I call it kind of biblical era fiction, so it's
Hmm.
historical in the biblical times. But I have a little different take on biblical fiction. I am the author of I don't know, something like 17 books now. I'm not really sure. I've lost count at some point. Um, and yeah, I've been writing for I think it's probably been about 10 years now, I would say. So
I love that.
yeah, and I live in Texas. I have two children. I'm an adoptive mom, and I am a recent breast cancer survivor as well.
Oh, wow. There's a lot to talk about. I'm like, where do we just I'm an adoptive mom. We've adopted 7.
Yeah.
I live in Arkansas, which is pretty close to Texas. We've had a lot of rain lately with all this going on. Okay, but let's start because you the first thing you said that interests me is you have a little bit of a different take on biblical fiction. So let's start with that because I want to hear that because I've written 3 um novels. I did Hannah, Esther, and Esther. Hannah, did I say that? Miriam, Hannah, and Esther, the 3 that I've done. Yeah, I'm like, wait. And so I always, even though I've written historical, I'm like, I never want to write biblical because it's like it's the Bible. Like you have to
Yes.
be so precise. Okay, but I would love to hear like what is your take on biblical fiction?
Well, my original inspiration for starting to write biblical fiction, I didn't start out to write biblical fiction. I just had this story kind of pour into my mind as I was doing my own research and trying to understand. Like, I was just a mom of little kids, and I was just trying to
Mhm.
understand the Word of God and trying to understand the ties between the Old Testament and the New Testament.
Mhm.
And so I was studying the context, the historical context for the Exodus, especially. And I just kind of got an idea because I saw the verse in the Bible that talks about how a mixed multitude goes up with the Hebrews out of Egypt, and I started to
Yes.
think about who are these people and why would they leave their gods, turn against Pharaoh, and go and follow this invisible God out into the desert, the one that had just destroyed their country too. And so it just kind of started there. And so my take on biblical fiction is I write from fictional characters' point of view.
Mhm.
And there are times when my characters come across biblical characters, but it's not from a Bible person's point of view. So that's my take.
I love that. I love that because I think some like when I sat down to write Miriam or Esther or Hannah, it's like, okay, I have what's in the Bible, but then you have to make up a whole bunch of stuff. Like, this is what was happening during this time. This is what other historical records say. But this, like, it's kind of scary because you're like, I could be completely wrong on this. And these are like
Yes,
people in the Bible. But I love that
yes,
you have historical characters and this book, The Shield of the Mighty, has King Saul. There's like different people that we will recognize immediately as we're reading the novel, but the main characters are not people that their names are in the Bible. And so does that
no,
give you do you feel like more freedom to
it
you're
does. It
historically
gives me a little
accurate?
bit more.
Yeah.
Yeah, it gives me a little bit more blank space. I absolutely use the Bible as the skeleton, the foundation of what I'm doing, and I try and keep as close as I possibly can when I'm writing my plots. But I weave those plots around what's going on in the Bible at the time. So we're really seeing through the eyes of witnesses into
Mhm.
the biblical accounts.
Oh, I love that. And I think that does bring it to life because you're also bringing in what people were doing, what types of occupations they were. What would it be like when you're gathering soldiers to come fight in Saul's army? Like there'll be one little verse that'll be talking this. And then it's like, but these are people's lives, right? They're getting
Yeah,
pulled in, tradesmen and soldiers. And so, okay,
yeah.
but I'm actually talking about part of the plot. So let's talk about the book and then it'll understand why I'm saying this. So explain the story and how you came up with this idea.
Well, this story, Shield of the Mighty, is book two in the Kingsmen series. And I had written series before this called The Covenant House. And
Mm.
I honestly just really didn't want to give up the family that I had created. I just have been in love with these characters. And so I wanted to do a spin-off. And so I just followed the time period. That one took place at the end of the Judges,
Mhm.
when Saul, I'm sorry, not Saul, Samuel was kind of a main character, and he was the judge at that time. And so I wanted to move into this early Kings period, but I wanted to kind of slow down. I think we kind of we talk about Saul as kind of a speed bump on the way to talking about King David, because
Mhm.
he's King David. But I wanted to slow down and just kind of wander around in this time period and see what was going on in this really crazy time period when Israel was going from this confederation of tribes to being a nation under one king, and what kind of political craziness was going on and chaos. And nobody ever agrees. It sometimes in the Bible it makes it sound like all Israel just came under a Saul and coalesced and everybody was happy. And we can see that that really wasn't true. So I just had the chance to kind of um muck around in that kind of mess and see what happened. And so I came up with this idea for a series, and it's four cousins who run off to fight for King Saul, and they're not really old enough to go fight for King Saul, but they go do it anyways. And then one of them disappears during the first battle, and that's kind of how it all spins out.
Oh, okay. So that's book 1. Does it have that
That's
part?
the beginning
Mhm.
of book 1, and then so book 2, we're a couple of years into Saul's reign, and we have the Philistines that are coming against Israel, and they're gathering in Michmash, and we have Saul telling Zevi, our main character, that he needs to go out and bring in some great fighters to go fight against the Philistines. So that is his job, is to go do that. But also, Saul at this time is building a kingdom. And so I
Mhm.
also have him going out and trying to find craftsmen, metal workers, and uh, uh, chariot makers, and anybody that can kind of be part of building up this.
Perfumers, people
Yeah,
that
and then of
were
course we have the perfumer, and he happens to run across a wonderfully beautiful, talented perfumer, and sparks begin to fly.
sparks begin to fly from the very
Yeah.
first, time in the shop.
Yes.
He's drawn to her, she's drawn to him, and what's her
Mhm.
name?
Her name is Johanna.
Yeah, Johanna. Okay, so,
Johanna.
right away, you're like, "Oh," she's like, "Oh, he's so handsome," but she's a widow, and
She's a
her
widow. Mhm.
father's trying to marry her off to all these people, and she just has
Yes.
her shop, she wants to be left alone,
Mhm, and
but
she does
then
not
yes.
like King Saul at all,
No.
so I'm not gonna make it easy for them.
Exactly. So, of course, you have someone who's gathering soldiers who is fighting for King Saul and someone who does not like King Saul, and that whole area does not like King
Yes.
Saul. Like, there's a lot of history, and I think one thing that really has helped me is the last couple years I've been reading through the Bible chronologically, and it makes sense. All of a sudden, you'll have a part of Chronicles, then you'll have part of the Judges, then you might have like later when it gets into First Samuel, and then you're gonna have information about Saul, and then you're gonna have a Psalm because it's all at the same time period, and that has helped me so much to wrap my mind around all of this and to understand kind of the timeline. And I think so many times as we have the Bible, we have, the books of the law and the books of poetry and the books of history and then the prophets, and it's just like jumbled. Like I couldn't tell you like
Yes.
who lived before, and I think that helps chronologically, but also novels like this where we're like, oh, okay, I can see why this part didn't like Saul and this part was like, okay, we aren't sure, and this part is like, yes, he's gonna bring us together. We could see all these through the lives of characters, and we can
Yes.
see why people would be fighting for Saul, why people would be against it. And so I love that you're able to take this moment in history that I think very few people probably understand very well, and we're able to, through this characters, through the story, understand more of what's going on. So
Yeah.
I
Just
love
get a
that.
bigger picture.
Yes, get a bigger picture. Okay, so you talked about these characters and you're not going to make it easy for them.
Sure.
So when you sit down, of course, you're weaving through biblical timeline. What is your goal like with the characters and with the story? it's not just like help you understand the story better, but I think all of us have themes and messages that we want to get across. So what are some of those things, like without giving it all away, but what are some of those things that come out in this book?
Well, I think kind of the big idea that I had was these four young men going in with an idea of who King Saul was, and,
Mhm.
excited about this new king and how he's going to bring everybody together. And, things kind of go off the rails with Saul pretty quickly. Within the first couple of years, things kind of
Yeah.
start getting fishy with him. And so I thought it would be so interesting to kind of see how they watched that kind of deterioration happen with Saul, and then to see that um it may be that they were excited about this king coming in and taking over, but he's not the real king. It
Mhm.
is Yahweh who is the real king of Israel. And for them to learn to take their focus off this human king, and that he's going to solve all of their problems, and turn it to the true king, and really learn to surrender themselves to the true king of Israel.
And I love that. And I love that that theme ties back to Moses, because even as they are getting ready to enter the promised land, which is hundreds of years prior to when your novel takes place, um, Moses is saying, do not set a king for yourself because Yahweh is your king. But also, he says, but when you get a king, because he knows what the people are going to do. And it talks about
And
the king.
Samuel warned them. He
Yes.
warned them, this is what's
Yes.
going to happen. Yeah.
And he's gonna take all your gold and silver, and all your children are gonna be his servants and slaves. Like God through Moses said this is gonna happen. Samuel confirmed like this is what's gonna happen. And then the people, of course, are looking around and they're like, we want to be like the other nations. And
They're
then
like, "We
like
don't care. Just give us a king." Yeah.
yeah. And looking back, we're like, oh, those people. But then
Yeah.
so much of it
It
applies
it
to our own
absolutely
lives. Yeah.
it absolutely does. We are always looking for a savior to come in and fix things politically and all the things around us. And of course, no human is going to do what God can do.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I love it. Okay, so as you sat down and you're working through this series and you have, your characters that you're working on, um where how do you figure out like you have a perfumer, which I love this character. I just love that whole idea because it's I think there's so much from the earth that we don't even realize anymore that are like people have been using these things for thousands of years of to heal and to do all these things. So you have that, and then you have the soldier, which again gives us the inside view of what was going on. So talk about your research and stuff of bringing these characters to life, because from the very first page, it seems like these are real people, and like, are they in the Bible? Because it seems like they should be in the Bible because these seems like
Well, they are.
very, I know, yeah. So tell us about that.
I'm the kind of person, I research as I go. I have kind of a base of knowledge when it comes to Israel now after doing this for so long.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so I honestly just follow my curiosity. I got the
Yes.
idea of her being a perfumer from that warning that Samuel says he's going to take your young men and your young women to be perfumers. And I was like, ooh, that sounds like an interesting thing to do.
Yeah.
And so I just follow my curiosity. I will watch YouTube videos and follow anybody I can that has some knowledge about, ancient plants and things that were native to
Hmm.
Israel. I even found an awesome website that is Israeli, and so I had to have it translated, about all the native flowers and their uses and medicinal uses. And so I honestly just go wherever the research leads me. And honestly, sometimes that takes me down some paths that I'm on for 5 and 6 hours, and then I'm just way over here on something that I will never use in my books.
Yeah. Oh,
But,
for in your current book, but maybe in a future book, you'll
you
need that
never know. You
information.
never know.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that you said that there's this base of knowledge, because the more you research, the more you understand the time periods, you
I agree
understand
with
the
you.
warnings, you understand what's happening with Samuel, you understand what was going on. The previous book, you're tying in these characters. And so I think that is what also it brings biblical fiction to life. You have to have a base of knowledge of the Bible as a whole to understand why certain things are happening in this time of history, because they in the books of law, they're God's saying what's going to happen. In the prophets, it's talking about this happened. I mean, it's all throughout. Jesus sometimes will go back and say, "This is what happened. Remember during the times of Saul," or whatever. Like different things happen. I think when we have to have that base of knowledge to understand to be able to even write fiction. And so I think,
Yeah.
yes, while like all historical fiction is work, you have the whole Bible to draw through and to kind of understand to make sure that you are like having the right themes come out, having the right motivations come out, and really seeing what God was doing in this time in history, which is also like, even though it's not on the page, God is a figure in all of biblical fiction.
Yeah, and it's also difficult to kind of dig through all of the historical information that's out there because much of it is not from a biblical worldview. And
Hmm.
so I kind of have to dig through some layers to get down to what was exactly going on and the people that I'm talking about and what their culture was like. And there's not a whole lot on just regular people because so much
Hmm.
of it has just passed away. It was an organic material that they were using. And so I have to kind of fill in the blank sometimes with my imagination. Yeah, but also to make it seem like it could be something that really happened. So there's a lot of layers that I have to go through as I'm researching.
Yeah, and I think the fact that we still have the Bible and have as much information that we have, and then to find like things like the Dead Sea Scrolls to realize how accurate has been translated, it like truly is a miracle. Because there's
It is
times
a
like
miracle.
the temple was like burned down. Like there's just all these things that
Mhm.
happen. Like, how did this continue on? How did these scrolls, like you're talking about organic material, these scrolls continued to be passed on and protected? It was like God's true hand
It
that
was.
brought it to where it is now. So
Absolutely.
I love it. Okay, so you talked about this being a 4-book series. Um, to tell us a little bit more of the previous book and maybe a little bit more of what's to come so we could see kind
Mhm.
of like the whole series.
Sure.
And then also, I started reading this not knowing there was a book 1, and I didn't feel like out of place. Like sometimes when you're reading a book 2, you're like, I don't know what's happening or who these people are. I picked it up and I just felt like I was there and I was part of the story and I could totally follow. So I would say that this can be read as a standalone, even if you haven't read book 1.
Yes, absolutely. I aim to do that in all of my books is to make it so that if somebody new picked it up, they could still enjoy it. They might want to go back and find out more about
Yes.
the other characters. So the first book is called Voice of the Ancient, and it's one of the first cousin. And I talked about how they run off to go fight for King Saul. And Abidan is a Levite. And in the Bible, it talks about how the Levites were not supposed to be men of war. They weren't
Mhm.
supposed to fight like the other tribes. And so he's not supposed to be on the battlefield at all. But, he's a guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he's a young man, and hearing stories about battles and battle glory and all this exciting things, and they've got this new king who's going to go out and fight the enemies of Israel. He's really excited about it, and of course, he goes against what he should do and what the law actually says that he should do, and goes to fight with his other cousins. And so, and then one of the cousins goes missing, and he decides that he's going to find that cousin. And so when the other two break off and go follow after Saul, he decides to stay on the other side of the river and find his cousin. And so that's where his adventure kind of begins.
Oh, awesome. And then what
Yeah.
about book 3? Is that one, are you
Book
working
3,
on it
I am working
or?
on it right now, so I won't give you too much about it, but
Okay,
it's
yeah.
it's another cousin, and, this cousin has got some real issues, I would say, and he's got some real demons that he's gonna have to fight as he's going along, and, I'm really excited. It's been really fun to try something that's a little bit kind of outside of what I would normally write, in a hero, so, yeah, it's
Oh,
gonna be
cool.
fun.
Okay. That's so cool. Okay, I wanna hear about your writing journey because you mentioned, like, you've been writing, about 10 years, and you have, I lost count, like
Yeah.
17 books, and that's not very typical, right? So for someone who's been writing a long time, has been on the conference world a long time and meeting people, like, sometimes it's a really long journey. I just wanna hear about your writing journey and how it happened and how you come to write so many books so quickly.
Sure. Well, um, I started writing when I was 35, I guess I was. And I had always wanted to write. I longingly looked at the library shelves and wanted to write a book, but I just didn't have the confidence. Honestly, I didn't have the
Mhm.
confidence. When somebody would ask if money was of no object, what would you do? And I always said writer. But in my mind, I never actually thought it would happen, honestly.
Mm.
I always like to say I wasn't even brave enough to ask God for what I really, really wanted. And so he's been so good to me to give me the desire of my heart, anyways. Like I said, I got this idea for an Egyptian woman who goes with the Hebrews on the Exodus. And so I started to write. I wrote about 4 chapters, and I decided it was the worst thing anybody had ever written. And nobody would ever want to read it. Maybe my mom, and that was about it. And so I put it away. And then I went through a period in my life where we moved to Seattle, where it rains all the time, and I couldn't
Mhm.
go anywhere. I was broker than broke. I had 2 little tiny kids, and so I just spent my time sitting by the fire, drinking lots of coffee and reading. And I just got inspired, and I thought, I can do this. I can sit down and write this manuscript. So I did. I entered it in the American Christian Fiction Writers
Yes.
their contest, and I semifinaled in the Genesis contest, and then I entered it in another contest, the Fraser contest with Susan May Warren, and I
Mhm.
won. And I was so astounded that I won that I didn't even think to write like an acceptance speech. So I just stood up there like a blithering idiot because I didn't even contemplate that I was in. It was just amazing. And so from there, I found a literary agent, and she pitched me to a number of different publications. And Bethany House uh, signed me after 60 days. It was just absolutely amazing. It was so cool because I didn't have the confidence in
Mhm.
any of these stages, but the Lord just put me with the right people at the right time. The editor who actually picked up my book um, left a month after she signed me, and it was just so cool. It was like God just put it on her desk, the right person at the right time, and He's just been so good to me the whole time.
I love that. And so you talked about reading and reading a lot. So I think that helps us as writers to
Absolutely.
know like the pace, the stories, the
Mhm.
conflict. For me, went to my first writers conference when I was 22, very young, and what I wrote, like I'm and I was pitching like 2 months after I started writing, like, at the conferences, so much looking back now, these people, like, I remember that. I'm like, "I know." Like, but it gives people hope, right? And they're like, "Yes, because we saw what you produced." But the fact that I kept reading, I kept working on stuff, and I think we are getting a knowledge of fiction, of story, of characters, of plots just by reading a lot of good books. And so if
I
someone
think
says
that's
they
very
w
important to
yeah.
internalize that so that it's
Mhm.
just you pick up a book and you know what's good story and what's not. Even before you understand plot structure and all those things, if you can just get the feel of what good story is and what makes you want to turn the pages is so 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 important. And I always tell people it's important to read deep, but it's also important to read wide.
Mhm.
Read different genres that you wouldn't normally gravitate towards so that you can pull things from different genres. I have plotting partners that I work with, and one of them writes mystery, and a couple of them write contemporary romance. One writes literary fiction, and we all work together and pull those things from our disparate genres and give each other ideas. And I think that has really deepened the way that I write and expanded my knowledge base.
Yeah, it's so good. And when I ask people when they say they want to write and ask them what they read, and they're like, "I really don't read," and I'm thinking in my head, "You're not going to become a writer." Like, I mean, it's really romantic to think of your name on a book, but like you have to read. And I always have an audiobook going. Always, I'm listening or I'm
Thank you.
reading books. When I interview people, I try to at least read a third of the book to get something in there. And so I'm all like you said, mystery, romance, time travel, sci-fi, like a wide variety. And I'm always like, oh wow, I really like how they did that. You never know what things you're gonna pick up when you're reading, but also just what makes good story, which makes good character. And so I think if for anyone out there, if they're interested in writing, first just start reading. I love how you said just a wide variety of things. What other
Yes.
advice, maybe if someone is out there, talked about plot structure. I have friends that I also plot books with that give input. You do too. What other advice would you have?
I do. I would probably say one of the best things that you can do is to be teachable.
Hmm.
It takes a while to get a thick skin when you first start writing, and putting your work out there is like taking your heart, putting it on a platter and saying, "Here, criticize it."
Yes, exactly.
But if you just come at writing with a teachable spirit and saying, I don't know everything. I want to learn as much as I can, and be willing to listen, and not everybody's going to have the same opinion, so you're going to have to take the good and maybe
Yes.
throw out a few things that don't really fit what you're trying to write or what your voice is. But just having a spirit of teachability, I think, is super important for new writers, especially.
I love that. Well, this is such great advice. And the Shield of the Mighty is such a great book. I really enjoyed it. When they first meet, I'm like, oh, it's getting warm in here. It was just that
That was
little
a fun
sparks.
meet cute to write.
Yes, this is the sparks. Okay, but I always love this is one question I always like to end with is what is a novel, a Christian novel that you just love?
Well, I'm gonna have to cheat a little bit and say it's a series really that
Okay.
has
All right.
was very, very special to me. And I read it many, many years ago. I would say probably in my mid-20s. It's maybe when it came out, I'm not really sure, but it's the Lowlands of Scotland series by
Ooh.
Liz Curtis
Oh
Higgs.
yeah.
And what I love about it is she took the Bible story of Jacob and Rachel and Leah and put it in Scotland, in historical Scotland setting. And it's just beautifully done. And it was so inspiring to me, I think, when I was first writing. I remember reading it again when I first started writing, just to kind of, I don't know, bathe in the beauty of the language. And so that actually inspired me as I was writing biblical fiction. So that's one I
I
highly
love
recommend.
it. I love it. Yes, so good. She's such a good writer too. All
Yes.
right, so Connie Lane, where can people go to find out more information about you and your books?
Well, you can go to my website, ConnilynCossette.com, and you can also find me on Facebook or Instagram. And I have a group called Connie Lynn's Bibliophiles that you can find on Facebook. And it's just a fun place where people can come together and chat about my books and learn about upcoming releases and things like that, get some behind the scenes, and maybe chat with me a little bit. And it's totally free, it's totally easy to come. So come and join us and let's chat about books.
I love it. And all these links will be in the show notes, so make sure you check those out. But Connie Lynn, thank you so much for being here today.
For having me. This has been really fun.